The Second World War left a huge amount of mystical documentary evidence and observations that even modern researchers cannot explain whether the beginning of the Great Patriotic War is connected with the tomb of Tamerlane. Why did animals often take part in bombings long before enemy planes appeared, and also what did UFOs do at the battle sites? On the eve of the Great Patriotic War, Soviet archaeologists opened the tomb of Tamerlane in Samarkand. Despite the warnings of local residents, the remains of the legendary conqueror were removed from the Mausoleum. Immediately after this, Germany invaded the USSR. Some researchers have found a mystical connection between these events. Uzbek front-line soldier Malik Kayumov participated in the archaeological expedition. In the documentary about the curse of Tamerlane, he said that he recorded on film the work of scientists in the mausoleum as a cameraman. Once he went to a local tea house and met elders there who warned that opening the grave would release the spirits of war. It is known that the excavation of the burial was personally authorized by Stalin. He was impressed by the iron lame man who created an empire literally out of nothing. The famous Soviet anthropologist Mikhail Gerasimov argued that the main goal of the expedition was to recreate the portrait of the great commander. Excavations began on June 16, 1941. On June 19, the tomb was opened, and on June 22, the war began. Kayumov, who went to the front, met with Georgy Zhukov in October 1942 and told him about the elders' warning. Georgy reported to Stalin about the mystical coincidence, and he ordered the reburial of Tamerlane's remains. This was done in November 1942, and after some time the Battle of Stalingrad turned the tide of the terrible war. The extraordinary sensitivity of animals, which often predict cataclysms well in advance, has long been known to researchers. The first such messages were recorded in ancient Greece. The Second World War provided rich material for reflection. However, experts still cannot explain the collected facts. Thus, historiography has noted numerous cases when residents of large cities could predict enemy air raids based on the behavior of their pets. For example, evidence of this kind was left by Londoners and residents of Leningrad. It was noted that the animals began to behave strangely long before they could hear the approaching aircraft. Sometimes such sensitivity is extremely difficult to explain from a scientific point of view. For example, it has long been believed that a sign of war is an increase in the number of wild animals that cease to be afraid of people. It was precisely this kind of evidence that was collected by Soviet scientists in the 80s, who recorded the memories of eyewitnesses. For example, stories have been preserved about how the number of wolves, squirrels, and rats increased abnormally in the spring of 1941. In front of this, the wolf walked straight into populated areas, and there were so many squirrels that in search of food they rushed to people entering the forest. There are simply no scientific explanations for such a mystical event. Fighting with a ghostly enemy is a fairly common story on the fronts of World War II. Often soldiers opened fire on the enemy, but he literally dissolved without leaving a trace. Similar cases were recorded on the Eastern Front with German and Soviet soldiers, but the most notorious occurred on February 25, 1942 in Los Angeles. The U.S. had just entered World War II. Air defense services were on high alert. At night, the military saw a large object glowing with a pale orange light in the sky on the coast. The alarm was immediately raised, and searchlights were soon able to catch the guest. At 3:16 a.m. heavy fire was opened from anti-aircraft guns. In total, more than 1,400 shells were fired, but the mysterious object survived the shelling without visible consequences. At 4:14 it disappeared from sight. After some time, the military declared the incident a false alarm, but photographs of the aircraft remained, which exclude an air defense error. The next day, the Los Angeles Times published a photo of the strange device. The photo clearly shows a large object at the intersection of several spotlights at once. This evidence has led some researchers to believe that American anti-aircraft gunners fired at the UFO. Experts are still arguing about the nature of the ghostly enemy. but you and I know that most likely this was one of the first tests of the mysterious Project Blyubim. World War II pilots left many testimonies that mentioned encounters with mysterious objects in the sky. The term UFO did not exist then. Such structures were considered tests of the latest enemy weapons, but modern researchers note that now this explanation does not stand up to criticism. For example, the memories of Soviet pilots Boris Surikov and Bajhanov have been preserved, who in 1944 flew out to bomb oil refineries in Romania and after some time noticed the approach of a strange round object. After approaching, the bomber's engines began to work intermittently. The pilots felt an electrostatic discharge, and after a few minutes the huge object moved away at incredible speed. However, the pilots dropped the bombs, refusing to continue the flight. The military spoke about the incident many years later. Similar cases were described by pilots from other countries of the anti-Hitler coalition in Western sources. Such objects were called Feufators. For example, in November 1944, pilots spotted numerous red, orange or white balloons in the sky in Germany, which made complex maneuvers and approached the aircraft. After the war, it turned out that similar objects were seen by German and Japanese pilots. Let's move to an earlier time. The beginning of the First World War. Hundreds of strange telegrams, reports, and protocols have been preserved in the police archives of many provinces. Military gendarmes and ordinary citizens reported about certain objects that at night appeared far from the front line, shining with dazzling rays. They easily dodged the shelling and landed anywhere. Russian ufologist Mikhail Gerstein and Belarusian historian Ilya Butov studied this documentary evidence that came across in 1914 to 1916, and now they assure they are very reminiscent of today's UFOs. Telegram from Major General Mavrin, received by the authorities in the Samara province. People often called the mysterious devices in the skies of the Russian Empire airplanes or airships, linking what they saw to something more or less familiar and already existing at that time. Although it followed from eyewitness testimony that the comparison was very conditional, the so-called airships had multicolored lights on the sides. Powerful searchlights had the highest maneuverability, could hover in one place, look somehow different, not at all like the shelves on which people flew then. And a report on the sighting of an illuminated airplane at night. August 24, 1914 in the Pskov province. Pre-revolutionary UFOs appeared even before the First World War. While the time was peaceful, they did not cause much concern. Although the newspapers wrote that some aircraft appeared above the location of military units and shone from the sky. On July 26 and 27, 1914, a mysterious airplane flew to Zhytomyr for 2 nights in a row, illuminating the camp disposition of troops with a searchlight. On August 1, 1914, Germany declared war on Russia. After which everything unusual in the sky was by default attributed to the Germans. Already on August 11, the commander of the Kazan military district, Major General Alexei Alexeyevich Mavrin, sent a telegram to the authorities of all the provinces. There are apparently aircraft in the area around the county. Repeatedly, flights were also observed in the area of factories, and even illuminated cities with a searchlight. I ask you to take measures to detect airplanes. If possible, I ordered the troops to shoot at the aircraft. The order did not prevent the appearance of a UFO even over Kazan itself. A day later, on August 13, another airplane, in quotation marks, was seen over the city, flying at a very significant altitude. On August 14, at about 11 o'clock in the evening, a group of workers led by technician Kazyanov saw a black apparatus, shaped like a cigar, flying quickly and silently over the river. That same night, Kazan residents observed a strange celestial phenomenon. Some bright ring-shaped circle with 2 rays slowly passed across the sky in the direction from the Arsk field to the mouth of the Kazanka River. On August 17, the son of a police supervisor saw a flying airplane illuminated in the middle in the area of the parade factories. The father, who arrived at the scene, also saw him. The gendarmes searched the plant, but found nothing and no one. And these facts lead us to one of the possible conclusions. Maybe these were the first prototypes of the Ahnenerbe UFO, because as we know, this organization was engaged in development during the Great Patriotic War, but perhaps it all started much earlier. As you know, Ahnenerbe, with German pedantry, divided the work into the following areas: the creation of a Superman, medicine, development of new non-standard types of weapons, including mass destruction including atomic weapons, the possibility of using religious mystical practices and the possibility of building new types of aircraft. It is now generally accepted that the foundation of the ideology of fascism was laid by secret societies long before the emergence of the Nazi state. The famous otherworldly researcher Velasquez claims that some occult keys provided information of a man-made nature. In particular, drawings and descriptions of flying discs, whose characteristics significantly exceeded the aircraft technology of that time. Today, a lot is known about the developments of the Third Reich in the field of flying saucers, but there are many more questions than answers. How successful were the Germans in this? Who helped them? Was the work curtailed after the war or continued in the strictest secrecy? One of the most mysterious areas of research by scientists in Nazi Germany remains the development of aircraft similar to flying saucers, or as they were called by Allied pilots during the war, Foo Fighters. Judging by the drawings, these saucers were no different from the UFOs that are often seen in different parts of the world. But it was not humanoids who were supposed to sit there, but SS officers. Documents captured by the Allies after the war and the results of interrogations of German scientists revealed that the Nazis had been working on the creation of unusual vertical take-off vehicles for many years. According to unverified rumors, in 1936, a UFO crashed near the city of Freiburg, Germany. It was discovered and perhaps German scientists, with the support of the SS organization, were able to repair and make its energy system and propulsion system work. However, attempts to reproduce them in terrestrial conditions ended in failure, so the UFO remained in one copy. Over the course of 9 years, new hulls were developed for alien systems, which acquired familiar features such as landing supports, antennas and weapons. 4 devices were created, conventionally Vril 1 and Vril 4. The first discs carried only machine gun weapons. But the last Vril 4 disc, judging by the photographs, was a tank turret installed. It's interesting that in the archives of the Third Reich there is one picture that changes the principles of twisting subtle physical fields, making it possible to create some kind of techno-magical apparatus. If you believe the evidence, electrodynamic machines that used rapid circulation not only changed the structure of time around them, but also hovered in the air. In an interview with the Zurich newspaper Tagel Anzeiger on November 19, 1954, George Klein claimed that flying discs were a top-secret weapon of the United States and Russia, allegedly based on German developments. According to him, in May 1945 in Breslau, the Russians captured, along with many rocketry engineers, a model of an unmanned disc built in Peenemünde and controlled by a radio beam. According to Klein, by the time the war ended, there were 2 commercial versions of the flying disc. A 5 motor with a diameter of about 17 meters and a 12 motor with a diameter of about 46 meters. Flying saucers could hover motionless in the air, as well as carry out complex and unusual maneuvers. Stability was ensured by a device built on the principle of a gyroscope. Klein also noted that the flying saucer created in Canada by John Frost according to German drawings reached a speed of 2,400 km per hour and was inspected by the British Field Marshal Montgomery. The source of information Miguel Serena is interesting, although he was the one who represented his homeland Chile in one of the UN commissions on nuclear energy for several years. And secondly, immediately in the post-war years, the USSR and the USA, having captured a significant part of the secret archives of the Third Reich, made almost parallel breakthroughs in time in the field of rocket science in the creation of atomic and nuclear weapons in space research. And they began to actively develop qualitatively new types of weapons, also immediately after the war, the two superpowers were particularly active in research in the field of psychotronic weapons. Also, comments that claim that the Ahnenerbe archives, by definition, cannot contain anything serious do not stand up to criticism. And in order to understand this, you don't even need to study them, it's enough to get acquainted with what was the responsibility of the Ahnenerbe organization, its president Heinrich Himmler. And this, by the way, is a total search of all archives and documents of national special services, scientific laboratories, Masonic secret societies and occult sects, preferably all over the world. A special Ahnenerbe expedition was immediately sent to each newly occupied country by the Wehrmacht, and sometimes they did not even expect occupation. In special cases, the tasks assigned to this organization were carried out by SS Special Forces. And it turns out that the Ahnenerbe archive is not at all theoretical studies of German mystics, but a multilingual collection of a wide variety of documents captured in many states and related to very specific organizations. In Steven Spielberg's Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the archaeologist-adventurer battles the Nazis for possession of the Holy Grail. The story only seems fictitious. In the 20s and 30s of the last century, the Nazis actually searched for the Grail. Archaeologist and historian Otto Rahn died under mysterious circumstances at the age of 35 just before the outbreak of World War II. 10 years earlier he had studied Parsifal by Wolfram von Eschenbach. He traveled throughout Europe in search of the Holy Grail and explored caves from the castles of the Kathar heretics. His search odyssey began in the 20s. A young German writer-historian decided to prepare a dissertation on Kyoto, an outstanding scientist who became the main authority for Wolfram von Eschenbach while working on the novel about the Grail. Studying Wolfram's Parsifal and Richard Wagner's opera, Otto Rahn came to the conclusion that the last Kathar fortress in southern France is von Eschenbach's Mons Alves, Wagner's Montsalvat. That is, the Grail Castle. Otto Rahn focused his search on Languedoc, the southern province of France. The historian decided that Wolfram was influenced by the poetry of the Cathars and the troubadours of Kyoto. More than once he climbed steep paths to the ruins of the Montségur castle, scoured the caves and rocks of the Pyrenees trying to find traces left by the Cathars. Medieval heretics, as they were called, brutally suppressed by the Catholic Church in the 13th century. He, like many other Grail seekers, had no doubt about the identity with the castle of Montségur. Otto Rahn knew. The legendary treasure of the Cathars was the Holy Grail. In the early 30s, Otto Rahn returned to Germany and the head of the SS, Heinrich Himmler, became interested in his research. He himself had long been fascinated by the legends of King Arthur and the Holy Grail. In Vöelsberg near the city of Paderborn in Westphalia, Himmler created the Grail Castle. Here the knights of Himmler's SS order gathered at the Nazi circle table. Vöelsberg Castle was built during the Renaissance, and at the beginning of the 17th century for the Prince Bishop of Paderborn. This is the only triangle-shaped castle in Germany. In August 1934, Heinrich Himmler rented it for 100 years for a nominal fee. 1 Reichsmark per year. The SS members transferred the old fortress to the cultural ideological spiritual headquarters of the SS order. Himmler's Camelot was created by the slave labor of concentration camp prisoners. 3,900 prisoners were brought to the construction site. For them, Himmler built a special concentration camp near Vöelsberg Castle. 1,285 prisoners died in this Camelot. Himmler began to give money for Otto Rahn's research. And the archaeologist and historian became an employee of the Ahnenerbe Nazi Bureau for the study of ancient German history and the heritage of their ancestors. In this capacity, in the summer of 1936 he participated in an expedition to Iceland. On the way to Iceland, the expedition made a stop in Orenburg. And Otto Rahn had the opportunity to ascend to Arthur's throne, a huge hill from which a magnificent view of the city opens. It is assumed that Himmler's emissaries wanted to find traces of Ultima Thule, the cradle of Nordic civilization, in Iceland. In the same year, Otto Rahn joined the ranks of Himmler's SS, and he was quickly awarded the rank of Unterskarführer. that is, a non-commissioned officer. In 1937, Otto Rahn was assigned to the SS concentration camp Dachau, where he began gardening. A year later, the Nazis became disillusioned with him and Otto resigned. In 1939, Otto Rahn fled Berlin, fearing for his life. He hid in the Tyrolean Alps, where he was found frozen in the snow near a river. Many mysterious theories have been constructed around the Nazi Grail. One version is that Otto Rahn, while exploring the Kathar caves in the vicinity of Montsegur, found the Holy Grail. The relic was then taken to Himmler's castle, Wedelsberg. And the Nazis killed Otto so that he would not reveal the secret of the Grail. It was also said that the Nazis staged black magic rituals at Wedelsberg Castle. According to another version, Hitler's closest assistant Rudolf Hess flew on a Messerschmitt to Scotland with the task of picking up the Holy Grail in the Rosslyn Chapel. Some lovers of incredible stories claimed that the Nazis from Languedoc sent a whole convoy of trucks with the Kathar treasure, and such a hypothesis was discussed. Otto Rahn allegedly did not die, but came down from the mountains and lived under a different name. Not one of these stories is supported by facts and documents. Heinrich Himmler intended to carry out large-scale construction work in Wedelsberg. It is estimated that they could have cost 250 million Reichsmarks. Louisburg was to become the center of the New World, the Amphel of the Thousand-Year Reich. Himmler's plans did not come true, and the Thousand-Year Reich lasted only 12 years. Himmler was arrested on May 22, 1945, and committed suicide by swallowing a capsule of potassium cyanide. Today a museum has been opened in Vili Perga, with a permanent exhibition of Louisburg 1933-1945. The exhibition is dedicated to the memory of the victims of the concentration camp. Another thing is curious. That after Otto Rahn visited Montsegur in 1933, an interesting event occurred. On the smooth wall of a small cave located under the ruins of the castle, Montreal das Alt, a drawing was discovered, a kind of symbolic image made in color. An article written by Alex Cute was devoted to the discovery. The drawing was subsequently studied by a specialist in the history of primitive society, Abat Glor. Perhaps this mysterious image would later help the seekers of the Grail. But were they able to use it, and was it ever found? You and I most likely won't find out, friends. What do you think? Write your comments, it will be very interesting to know your version.